Healthy aging, the care and feeding of mitochondria. I've been in practice for about 35 years, and my practice is now focused for the last 20 years on integrative cancer care and patients with complex chronic illnesses. And mitochondrial health is really crucial to this patient population. I originally started out in my undergraduate years in cell biology, and at that time, the mitochondria were recently discovered by Lynn Margulis, who thought that mitochondria were bacteria that had become commensal inside the cell. And if you look at the structure of the mitochondria, you'll see they do look like little single-celled organisms that have a lot of functions familiar to us with single-celled organisms. So we'll talk about all of that. My interest really, I'm on a mission to really change the face of cancer care and introduce a health model into oncology and to train frontline clinicians to be able to be part of an integrative care team. But this is true with all chronic illnesses as well. I think it's really important that patients have a health expert on their team and not just a disease expert. So towards that end, I have an online training program through my American Institute of Integrative Oncology and teaching my Outsmart Cancer system, which I developed over the last 25 years, and a free website, Integrative Cancer Answers, for patients and families who have been touched by cancer. And so that's really where my focus is. But in that journey, understanding the function of mitochondria has been crucial to really changing the behavior of tumor cells. And so that's a context in which I really have focused. And of course, cancer patients are in a demographic of patients over 50 years old. And so these patients are comorbid typically with other chronic illnesses. And so the mitochondria are a part. So if you study the mitochondria, you will understand how to manage a lot of the illnesses that are common to patients in this age group, and also patients who have had significant toxic exposures. You'll see shortly that the mitochondria are exquisitely sensitive to toxins in the environment. But I do have to warn you that if you really get into this, you will have the danger of becoming a mitochondriac like me. All right. So the other thing is, always because of the limitations of time, there is never enough time to teach everything I really want to teach. So there's a couple of downloads at this link here, and this slide will appear again at the end of the webinar, and we'll also have plenty of time for questions and answers. So on this link, you'll get a handout by me of mitochondrial supplements that I use. And then I've also given you access to a webinar that I gave last year on mitochondrial metabolism and ketogenesis and ketogenic diets and how that relates to cancer and where fasting comes in. So that's my gift to you because it'll really round out what we go over today. So let's just take a look, get a high altitude view of understanding mitochondria before we dive in on how to really change the health and behavior of mitochondria with our clinical toolbox. So every cell has mitochondria except for red blood cells. And they are little organelles that produce the energy currency of cells, adenine triphosphate, ATP. And in addition to that, the mitochondria are not just energy factories. A lot of people think of them that way, but they also are quite involved in a number of cell signaling and cell regulation functions that govern cellular metabolism, and in particular apoptosis, which is the natural recognition by a cell that it's aberrant and should recycle itself and commit suicide. And so we'll talk about that too, because that's really important in having normal signaling for recycling of mitochondria, recycling of cells that have become damaged so that they don't persist and cause pathologic functions. Now, in the context of this lecture, we want to think about how we're going to optimize mitochondrial function. And there are a couple of really big factors to pay attention to as we go through the details. So we want to be sure we have good control of quenching free radicals, managing oxidative stress, because the electron transport chain, the process of oxidative phosphorylation, part of the energy production of ATP, is exquisitely sensitive to oxidative stress itself. It's a high oxidative environment, and so making sure that the cell and the mitochondria is able to quench free radicals is crucial to the function of mitochondria as well as the cell, and in terms of protection of mitochondrial and nuclear DNA. And then we want to make sure that the mitochondrial membranes, which are very, very delicate and very, very sensitive, also are healthy and have good integrity, and that the mitochondria are able to transport critical metabolites, in particular fatty acids, into the mitochondria across that cell membrane. And so these are things to keep top of mind as we go through this. Now, when we think of the syndromes of aging, mitochondrial health is crucial to all of them. So having healthy mitochondria is really important to healthy aging and longevity. And as mitochondria become dysfunctional, then we see more hallmarks of aging, and I'll show you a chart that'll allow you to really understand all of the things that go into the expression of mitochondrial dysfunction. And so most chronic illnesses have some kind of mitochondrial dysfunction. The presentation of that can be quite different, but once you understand the underlying principles, you will recognize it and understand that you need to do either mitochondrial rescue, repair, or support in order to help your patient. Now, because mitochondria do produce ATP, are the energy factory inside the cell, then those cells that are most energy demanding have the most mitochondria. So that's the brain, the myocardium, skeletal muscle, the liver and kidney, places where there's high metabolic activity. And these are also the places where we see symptoms. Now, Dean Raffelock is a wonderful, wonderful functional medicine chiropractor, and I absolutely love this statement that he made. I rarely read quotes, but I'm going to here because I love the way he's presented this. Our mitochondria, our mitochondria are the energy powerhouses of the cell. They could accurately be compared to armored nuclear power plants because they activate and safely contain, when healthy, the intense explosions required to cleave the high energy bond between two oxygen atoms. These oxygen cleaving explosions would cause devastating widespread oxidative damage akin to a nuclear meltdown if they occurred anywhere else in the body. The key point here is that mitochondria are exponentially better at producing ATP, and any physiologic process that causes mitochondrial dysfunction can cause widespread cellular energy deficits and fatigue, adversely affecting virtually all organs. So this environment inside of the mitochondria is an energy factory with breaking of bonds to release energy and the production of a lot of oxidative stress. If this isn't properly controlled, that's when the breakdown occurs. Now, this slide will show you, this is from Joe Bisorno in this really fantastic paper he wrote on mitochondria, fundamental to life and death. And this is a graph he created, and if you can read it, you'll see along the bottom are all these symptoms and signs that go with our picture of aging, and that these all have to do with mitochondrial dysfunction, starting with graying of the hair, muscle weakness, cerebral atrophy, facial wrinkles, congestive heart failure, hair loss, cancer, cerebellar atrophy, loss of visual acuity, loss of hearing, high lipids, urinary tract infections, vertigo, all the way up to cataracts, neuropathy, seizures, Parkinson's disease, atherosclerosis, dementia. So these are all the things that are the picture of aging, and these are symptoms of loss of robust mitochondrial function. Now, fatigue and lethargy are absolutely the first signs. And so if you have a patient that comes in and says that they're tired all the time, no matter how much sleep they get, or if when they exercise they feel tired, they don't recover well, these are signs of mitochondriopathy. Impaired sensory function, chronic pain, mood disorders, particularly depression, lack of motivation, cognitive compromise, hypersensitivity of the nervous system, impaired detoxification, and sort of these generalized loss of well-being, loss of resilience. These are your early obtuse symptoms that there may be mitochondriopathies. And also to point out that mitochondrial function is crucial to immune response. The innate immune and inflammatory responses require a healthy mitochondria, and what we call sickness behavior, when we have a viral infection, that feeling like you want to curl up, take a nap, not do much, that feeling of fatigue, loss of energy, loss of motivation, wanting to sleep, feeling that your muscles are weak. This is a result of the innate immune response to a viral infection. And this in Chinese medicine is the picture of what we call yang deficiency, when the fiery, active energy is lost and collapses. And so again, this is the picture of mitochondrial dysfunction. And just a little quick review of the structure, because structure and function are linked. We have a matrix inside of the mitochondria, and it helps maintain pH so that the Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle, can work properly. We have intermediate space that can accumulate protons as these processes occur. We have an outer membrane and an inner membrane, and that space in between them. The outer membrane, like a cell, has transport proteins that shuttle signals and has a bioelectric gradient and transports proteins, and also transports pyruvate, the result of glycolysis that is occurring in the cytosol, into the mitochondria as fuel for the citric acid cycle, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. The inner membrane contains that electron transport chain, and this is where ATP is produced by the process of oxidative phosphorylation. And this inner membrane is incredibly delicate and very sensitive to oxidative stress. And then we have the cristae, which are just these folds which give us a greater surface area in which all of this can happen. And then certain regions of the mitochondria are where these crucial functions occur, such that the citric acid cycle, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain occur in distinct areas of the mitochondria. And the products of all of these, ATP for fuel for the cell, energy for the cell, byproduct hydrogen peroxide has an impact on redox signaling and this ability to quench free radicals. We also have the production of other molecules of energy and nutrient sensing, such as cyclic AMP, NAD, and we also have the signaling for apoptosis when the mitochondria releases cytochrome C out into the cytosol, and a series of enzyme reactions occur that trigger apoptosis. And then we also have gene regulation. And one of the things that is becoming more well accepted is that it's actually the mitochondrial DNA that is damaged before nuclear DNA is damaged, and then mitochondrial dysfunction leads to many other diseases that we may have thought of as nuclear genetic issues, but that comes second. And so protecting mitochondria from the environment is actually a very powerful thing to do. So why do mitochondria become dysfunctional? So there are many triggers of that will lead the mitochondria to become dysfunctional, which leads to apoptosis and the death of the cell in which that mitochondria resides. And so upregulation of the HPA axis, high cortisol, environmental toxins are one of the biggest stressors to mitochondrial function. Malnutrition, not having the right nutrients available to act as cofactors in all of these reactions that are occurring inside of the mitochondria, high inflammation and high oxidative stress. These are conditions of the biosystem, of the terrain of the cell that impair mitochondrial function. And so if the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain cannot perform mitochondrial function and produce ATP, and then all these other cascade of functions become involved such that the mitochondrial membrane becomes hyperpermeable and depolarizes, and therefore the electrical signaling that keeps this a coordinated symphony goes haywire. Again, oxidative stress, the depletion of NAD, and the release of cytochrome C are all the result of all this dysfunction. So when the mitochondria can no longer perform its function, it goes through signaling to tell the cell we can't survive and please recycle. And so that is what apoptosis is. Now the mitochondria can also go through their own recycling without the cell failing, because there's a lot of mitochondria in the cell. And so if you have a cell with a lot of mitochondria, the whole cell might not need to go through apoptosis, and we'll show you that. I also want to emphasize that most pharmaceuticals are mitochondrial toxins, and so there's an inhibition of the mitochondrial DNA transcription and an inhibition of the electron transport chain, meaning that the mitochondria cannot normally perform its function of manufacturing ATP. There is an inhibition of the enzymes required for glycolysis and fatty acid beta oxidation, which again are parts of supplying the mitochondria with the raw materials to make ATP. A lot of pharmaceuticals, and particularly a lot of cancer treatments, produce oxidative stress and reactive oxygen species, and thereby damage cancer cells, then also damaging healthy cells and mitochondria. And then a lot of pharmaceuticals will increase needs for certain nutrients and create deficiencies that rob the cell and the mitochondria of the nutrients they need to perform their functions. And similarly, a lot of environmental chemicals and environmental inputs will damage the very delicate mitochondrial membranes. And this is everything from heavy metals, plastics, pesticides, herbicides, glyphosate, dichlorobenzene, pharmaceuticals we mentioned, even mycotoxins, excess lactic acid, ketones, lipofuscin, glutathione conjugates, such that redox isn't happening normally, some organic sulfates in excess. And so there's a lot of environmental stress for mitochondria. And so considering a intake of a patient of their toxic exposures when you're assessing a patient to help resolve not only the dysfunction in front of you, but the mediating trigger factors that came before, so that you have a long-term solution. Now, this image here comes from a paper on looking at metabolic therapies for glycemic and insulin control and the role of L-carnitine. So, of course, insulin and glucose are part of supplying energy for the cell, and if that is disrupted, then we are going to have this mitochondrial disruption as well. So I just want to impress upon you that all of these crucial functions lead to chronic illnesses. So mitochondrial gene expression might be changed. That can lead to vascular diseases, diabetes, obesity, insulin resistance. It can also lead to for example, heart failure, abnormalities in fatty acid metabolism, inflammatory impairment, enhancement of insulin resistance, which is really an epidemic, as we know, in our culture here in the United States, increase in reactive oxygen species, and changes in the fuel and energy homeostasis balance. All of these things are in the purview of mitochondrial function, and when any of these go haywire and dysfunction, then the cellular functions that give us health become disrupted. And so I just want to say the mitochondria are incredibly sensitive to environmental toxins. I think that's really important to understand. So anyone who comes in with exaggerated mitochondrial dysfunction probably has had a toxic exposure. That certainly could be drugs that they've been prescribed, but I always ask about the home environment, the work environment, and sort of hobbies and history to find out what the person's been exposed to. Now, this idea of hormesis is very crucial to understanding how we age and whether or not we are resilient as we age. So hormesis means that a mild stress, a small dose of something, will actually stimulate our body to produce a solution, to produce a response that solves that need in our system. And so hormesis is kind of normal function of adapting to our environment. And the mitochondria are very, very good at hormesis, and that's called mitohormesis. But if we have a single huge exposure, or if we have multiple toxic exposures over a long period of time, that can lead to this mitochondrial damage, and then we are no longer resilient, and we cannot then respond in a way that protects our cells and our function. And so the types of stressors that you might want to think about is exposure to radiation, or calorie and food restrictions, heat stressors, think dehydration, oxidative stress. These are routine exposures. Even from eating a meal produces oxidative stress. So we have to be able to have a system that can solve that. And when we don't, we get into physiologic trouble. And I think very much that this idea of hormesis is part of what homeopathy is based on, where a small dose of something can stimulate the body to solve a problem that would occur if a large dose of that same substance would have been given. So one of the teaching examples in homeopathy is if a